to our monthly Cube chat. Today is navigating cloud costs, a product-centric approach to FinOps. We're going to just dig right in here. So for today's agenda, I'm just going to give you some quick intros to our speakers today, as well as a little bit about Cube cost. Then we'll really just dig into the why. What is FinOps? Why is it important? And then we'll start to break it down and what this really means for product teams. So how you even start to monitor and manage your cloud costs, but also achieving efficiency with those cloud costs. And then we'll also leave some time at the end for a Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to submit those throughout the duration of the webinar. There is a Q&A feature in your Zoom webinar, so you can submit any questions that you have throughout, and we'll cover as many as we can at the end. I also wanted to flag that we will be recording this webinar today. So if you can't attend the whole thing or would like to share it with others, just be on the lookout for an email from myself after this call, and I will send a recording out of that as well as a copy of the presentation today. Now, just to give you a little bit of info about KubeCost. So we started in early 2019 as an open source tool to give developers visibility into their Kubernetes spend. Fast forward to today, and we're helping thousands of teams from little startups to giant enterprises just keep an eye on their cloud cost and optimize those with actions and different insights and so forth. We are available on AWS, Azure, GCP, Oracle as of our 2.4 release, and we're also available for on-prem. So regardless of where you might be running your Kubernetes, we are really that one-stop shop to give you the full view of what your costs are. And then also, in case you missed the big news, we were recently acquired by IBM. We just announced that a couple weeks ago. So we will be joining IBM in their new FinOps practice. So that's going to be along with the Cloudability product they have, Aptio and Turbonomic. So we have lots of exciting news to share about that as we start kind of unfolding everything and figuring out what that will look like. But I promise we'll be sharing out as much information with you as we can. But we're very excited about this because it's going to give us a lot more resources to really deliver an even better product for you. So I think we'll have a lot in store for you that you should be excited about. Moving on next to our first speaker, we have Mike. He is our Director of Finance here at KubeCost. He's spent his whole career in early stage tech, so kind of knows a lot about everything that we'll be talking about today. So I think you'll be very pleased to have him tell you all about FinOps today. He's really kind of the head of our FinOps team here. So he keeps everyone in check, but also is very great and collaborative and can share some great insights on how you can also get started on your FinOps practice within your org. He has spent he handles everything from FP&A to our day-to-day management, but he also specifically loves SaaS metrics. So if you want to connect with him, feel free. I dropped his LinkedIn there, so you can go chat with him about all things FinOps and finance. And then our second speaker today is Joe, and Joe is our principal product manager. He also has a very diverse background in all types of startups and tech companies, from cybersecurity to fintech to edtech. He's also been in the cloud space specifically for quite a while. So he comes from Weaveworks, and he's been here for about 6 months and is already jumping right in and hosting all of our webinars, and he has a ton of knowledge to share. So I also dropped a link to his LinkedIn here if you want to connect with him and go talk about anything related to product marketing or product specifically as well. And with that, I will shut up and turn it over to our speakers today.
Thanks, Dee. All right. So let's just take a minute to set the stage on why FinOps matters now more than ever. I know it's not going to be a huge surprise to anyone on this webinar, but we're seeing a huge trend in orgs moving from, embracing the cloud, moving from on-prem to cloud native. Obviously, it offers more flexibility, scalability, faster deployment cycles. You can take advantage of containerization, microservices, really just modernizing how your applications are built and managed. But with that, there's an increase in the complexity of those costs. So you have this huge benefit of being able to scale up and down demand, but you pay for that flexibility in the complexity of managing those costs. Traditional budgeting methods just simply don't work in my experience. We got a lot of, on the finance side, we have a lot of costs that are really straightforward. Payroll, buying computers, stuff like that. But when you're working with variable pricing models, it kind of falls apart. Whenever I'm trying to explain what I do to family members who don't work in tech, I kind of talk about how we used to buy servers. You'd have a procurement department who would go, put it out to bid for 5 or 10 server makers and then, negotiate the price, and that was kind of it. Maybe you'd pay for some electricity on the back end, but other than that, like the cost was really decided. But with cloud native environments, that's flipped, where we're just dealing with the variable pricing and the usage-based models. And so for a finance team, that's really difficult. Like we used to have control over these things, and now we have pretty much like the least amount of control. We're kind of like getting the bill in the mail, after everyone has made some decisions. So that really poses a challenge for us, and that's why FinOps, I think, is an important part of this. It's a trade-off that I think a lot of organizations think is worth it, but it does come with some challenges. And then FinOps really bridges the gap. So we have this problem, and like, what do we do about it? It's really about collaboration, getting everyone on the same page, make better, smarter decisions on cloud use and spending. And there's a couple things that go into that. Obviously, you have the tools element, but there's a huge, in my experience, collaboration part of this, where it's a very human problem of, understanding what everyone needs and kind of working your way there. Everybody wants better visibility into where resources are going, where money is going, and we just want to make sure those cloud investments are delivering the best possible outcome. So that's really about, getting a FinOps practice together and getting these folks across finance, tech, and business all working together. So from my perspective, I kind of said I'm thinking about a lot of different parts of the business. But when we think about cloud spend generally, we have a couple challenges on the finance side. I think one is understanding past spend. This tends to be a huge cost driver for us. Like we're a SaaS company, we're remote. So our biggest expense here is always going to be people. It's like 75-80% of our total cost for the business. And number two is cloud spend, it's hosting. So we are always trying to understand that. And I think finance, a lot of times, we really just get the bill. The decisions have been made a long time ago on what engineering is done, and we're trying to kind of untangle that as we do our monthly close. And it's not very efficient, and you really can't get a lot of good information out of it. So one of the main things I always try to do is understand like what are our development costs versus our cost of goods sold, like our incremental customer costs. So that's always really helpful, but it's also not trivial sometimes. Like it really takes a lot of work to like talk to engineering, figure out what each dollar is doing. And once you can kind of hammer in on those customer costs, then we can start to attribute the cost of each product. So, are we spending way too much on a certain product and it's not really that sustainable, or is this something that we should like, I don't always want to be like the bearer of bad news. Like, can we find something that's actually really efficient and we should like, give more resources to a certain segment or a certain product. So I try to keep an open mind where it's not just like, hey, we're spending too much money. It's like, I'd love to spend more money if we can kind of like unlock something that's productive there. So we have past spend, and then we also have forecasting future spend. So obviously a huge part of my job is making sure that the entire business is sustainable. So we're forecasting out people costs, salaries, health insurance, 12 months, 24 months, 36 months. But I also want to be able to do that with our hosting costs, our variable spend. So that's a huge part of it. Understanding where we are as an org on spend, but then also being able to accurately extrapolate out and plan for these costs and make sure we have enough money for it, we have enough resources so that engineering and product can do their thing and not be encumbered. So, all right. So who is who in key FinOps personas? Identified 4 here. Obviously, if you look at some of the FinOps literature, they've really expanded it. But I think for this conversation, these 4 are the most important. Number 1 is product. As they're developing new segments, new products, you need to understand how cloud costs impact the profitability of each product. Now, the main focus is always going to be delivering, customer value, but we want to make sure these things are sustainable. If we can balance that performance and customer experience with efficiency, we're going to have, a really productive development cycle. Engineering, right below that, engineering is no surprise, it's always going to be the closest. That relationship is absolutely the most critical. We just want to be making decisions that balance the cost, with performance and reliability. We just want to help engineering be aware of implications of decisions made on cloud spend, whether it's selecting cloud instance, scaling applications, deploying services or resources. I think I've worked in organizations where engineering has never seen an AWS bill. They have no idea how much money we spend, and they're not uninterested. It's just like no one has ever really communicated it. And I do find that engineers love the challenge of like, hey, this is how much we spent on this thing. And they're like, really? Are you sure about that? And we can learn a lot once we start talking to each other. So I think it's just a part of the product, and it's just another piece of building something sustainable. Obviously, I'm coming from the finance persona. So I think the big goal of ours is to align cloud spend with the business objectives, but finance folks are not always familiar with the technical aspects. And I don't think I don't think that's a good excuse, really. I think we should make an effort to, develop a shared language with engineering and product, and like really try to understand as much as we can on the technical side so that we can help inform those decisions. Obviously, we're not going to understand it all overnight, but I think a little bit of effort goes a long way in bridging that gap. And then that all rolls up to leadership. They're going to be focused on the broader business goals. Which investments yield a positive return? Are there some investments that are just not working or need to be rethought? And I find that, if you have the three of us, product engineering and finance, working together, we can really inform what leadership is doing, allow them to make high-level decisions about cloud strategy. And it can be everything from, maybe there are some things aren't working, but maybe it's expanding cloud infrastructure. Maybe it's a different way to scale ops or entering new markets. So I think all of those really inform what leadership is trying to do.
Thanks, Mike. I so agree. And, this is, I think, a timely and great conversation to be having. I might be a little bit biased because I've spent roughly 20 years in product management and on product teams, especially in the tech space. I think everybody is really concerned about costs. I think everybody wants to do the right thing when it comes to ongoing cloud costs and drive for efficiency. I think product teams are in a unique position to have a lot of positive influence there and to be able to move the needle. And to be clear, that's like the needle going down and not up and to the right, which it always does when it comes to cloud costs. So right there at the intersection of everything, engineering, finance, product owners, is where product teams sit, and they can really make critical impacts there, especially product owners and product managers that have some profit and loss responsibility, right? If you own the numbers and the financial outcomes, then it's absolutely in your team's best interest and in your best interest to do your part and really drive for cloud cost efficiencies. The decisions that you make as product teams, the actions that you take, really have direct impacts on cloud spend. PMs are traditionally kind of value hawks, right? The mission of the day for product teams is to balance everything from feature requests to product enhancements, new feature creation, new product creation, balance all of that with customer value. Like, what are we doing that creates value for the customer? And whether that's removing a bug that's, painful to people using your solution, or whether that is going after an entirely new market, the balance of customer value versus the investments of any type of resources has to be like kind of front and center in your decision making. And they really ensure that like technical resources are being used efficiently. And sometimes that's people, right? It's engineering cycles, it's story points. Sometimes it's a spike on a potential, new capability and figuring out whether that's a bet that you want to place. And sometimes those resources mean things like load balancers and nodes in an AWS or an Azure environment, and being a good steward of the cost across the board that's being invested in the product. PMs have to be collaboration gurus. If you're a product manager, you're listening to this, you understand kind of innately what I mean by you have to influence others and you have to get people to work together collaboratively around common shared goals and understandings. Otherwise, you're going to really have a hard time as a product manager and getting projects done, getting initiatives complete is going to be next to impossible. So you have to bridge the gap between teams like finance and engineering, who all don't always speak the same language, who don't always understand the same terminology, whose goals might be vastly different. Engineering that wants to build reliable, stable, high-performance applications, and finance teams that want to understand, where's the money going? Are we doing this as efficiently as we can? And are there tools and ways that we can understand, some more granular cost observability, like what is this product costing us? What is this team's project costing us? What would happen if we were to scale up and add 10,000 more customers or 50,000 more customers? Maybe most importantly, they kind of own the cost outcomes of their products and of the bets that they're placing on product related things. So whether a product is profitable or not may come down to whether you have a job or not in product. And so understanding the costs through FinOps lenses, I think, is the mission of the day for product teams. It's going to help you do a much better job at just about everything. When I look at FinOps principles, I think that they really align closely, in my honest opinion, with those of the principles of good product management. I see it like in every nook and cranny, right? Collaboration being like this cornerstone of both product management and of FinOps practices. So fostering communication, being the person drives consistent, transparent communication from team to team, being kind of a conduit of communication between teams that are a little siloed, not necessarily because your organization is full of silos, but because teams don't necessarily work together in any kind of degree of consistency or repetitions that, they form strong bonds, relationships, and they communicate regularly about work-related things. Product teams have to kind of bring that to the surface, getting everybody on board, getting everybody marching with a common understanding, a common set of goals, understanding, why are we doing this? What are we doing it for? And who are we doing it for? Are all, I think, like baked in parts of good product management. And I also see those in FinOps. When product teams take ownership, they are driven to perform well. I think that when FinOps teams take ownership, engineering teams take ownership, leadership takes ownership of the business outcomes that they're looking to get from FinOps practices, they drive themselves to perform in ways that is good for both the bottom line, but also that creates kind of an efficiency of awareness. And it's like a state of mind, I think, in some ways. Organizationally, when you really start thinking about FinOps practices and the business outcomes that you're shooting for, they tend to materialize because it's something that is top of mind. I think maintaining like levels of spend, budget adherence, profitability are all things that you see common across product teams and FinOps teams. PMs also have to optimize customer value, like in everything that they do and everything that they think about. So focusing on value streams, much in the same way that FinOps teams do, you're going to find that every engineering story point gets scrutinized. Every dollar that gets spent on Kubernetes should be scrutinized. These are all things that create value for customers instead of adding to the overall cost of a product or decreasing the profitability of that product, and the customer really not feeling any kind of ROI on the investments that you're making as a product team, as an engineering team. Over time, these things that deliver value need to balloon exponentially, and FinOps is looking to achieve the same things, right? A crawl, walk, run scenario in product is very much the same as trying to burn down technical debt, trying to re-architect systems to become more efficient for future development or scalability or things like that. Real common between PM teams and FinOps teams. There needs to be a high degree of transparency, and data-driven decisions reign supreme on both sides of this conversation, with FinOps practitioners and also with product managers and product teams, making informed decisions, finding sources of truth, leveraging reporting, analytics that everyone can get access to, that answers the questions for the business in ways that everybody can understand. can move to the next slide. By embedding these kinds of FinOps patterns and practices within your product development orgs, you're going to maximize value to your customer. You're going to maximize value to your business. It's good for everybody, right? From a planning standpoint, it means that financial planning becomes part of your sprint planning. It becomes part of your product roadmap. You're going to have or develop better tools to be able to measure and track the return on investment for a given project or a given initiative. You're going to be able to build code in early development phases that's going to adopt more efficient approaches to writing applications, to testing applications. You're going to encourage teams to adopt more cost-efficient tools, more cost-efficient architectures, and then track the outcomes of those. That's all operating with kind of a FinOps mindset. You're going to want to approach testing and quality control with the same kind of FinOps principles in mind as well. Better monitoring strategies to be able to understand what the cost impact is of decisions that you're making before you ship software to the world is going to prevent rework or more technical debt from creeping in that actually costs the organization money. When it comes to deployment, right, you'll benefit from learning about leaning on automation. To be able to scale and to right size resources efficiently. At some point, you can't just throw more people at the problems because it's not cost effective. You need to figure out ways that you can have less human involvement in many cases, reduce the potential for human error, drive towards this kind of continuous and iterative process of improving cost efficiency. And that's kind of the happy outcome that everybody should be shooting for, is this iterative continuous improvement journey where you've got the right tools, you've got the right tactics, you're constantly refining them over time. You're able to understand what your cogs are, and you have an ability to make impacts throughout everything product related, from early napkin sketches all the way through development, deployment to sunset of that product in ways that are cost optimized. And I know that this all, if you're product people, you're like, yeah, this all sounds really nice on paper, right? Like it's really hard to do. And I understand that. I've been a part of product teams that have wrestled with this, and there's no silver bullet. There's no one thing. There's no one product that you can buy that just solves all of these problems. But some real world applications that you can put into place early and relatively at a low calorie level can make real impacts on it. So things like, identifying drivers of wasteful spend. It could be, everything from workloads and applications, but it could also be just over provisioned infrastructure that stuff's running on. And a lot of teams don't know that there's tools out there like KubeCost that can help identify the waste in their workflow, in their workload, in their infrastructure, and be able to pinpoint opportunities to reduce that waste without sacrificing stability or reliability. And teams and apps from one organization or even one team to another can vary widely in their approaches, in their patterns, in the tools that they use, in the software language that they write their applications in. And so understanding that context is really key to all of this as a product team when it comes to FinOps, and operating more cost effectively is key to unlocking a lot of the savings opportunities, because what might work great for one org or one team might not work great for another. So, be ready to be highly adaptive in the way that you're approaching these things. One way is you can use solutions that measure efficiency by understanding things like workload idle and infrastructure idle, and then be able to track those over time. Leadership is going to be very interested in understanding, are we getting more cost efficient, or are we treading water? Or as we add more applications, more developers, and more customers, are things getting less efficient over time and our waste is growing? Being able to just simply track that through common tools like KubeCost is a great first step for organizations, and really moves the needle. Another way is just to continue to be data driven and collaborative. Create meetings, right? Like bring people together in a room, much like you would to talk about a roadmap or driving towards a product decision about pricing or packaging or messaging, you can do those same things around FinOps practices and start to be that kernel that grows a FinOps practice within your organization, and then start to turn that into a culture of FinOps practices and efficiency. We can move to the next one.
So some effective cost monitoring strategies, like what can you do? I'm going to talk about usage patterns and implementing cost alerts, and then I'll pass it to Joe. But usage patterns I found to be super valuable. I think one of the keys for a strong FinOps practice generally is just monitoring cloud usage patterns. It helps me understand how resources are being consumed across different teams, products, services. And then we can identify where cloud resources might be underutilized or over-provisioned or mismanaged or any of those things, just leading to the unnecessary cost aspect of it. It also allows us to dig deeper into cloud consumption data, and we can start to understand, like, why does a usage spike occur? When does it occur? What's driving it? And how do they align with some of our business objectives? It also helps us dig into like anomaly detection and just identify general trends. And it encourages us to just get in a good rhythm of like checking for the unexpected surges. And I think it's okay if it happens, but just understanding why, and we get better at it as we have like an iterative process. And then the second thing is implementing cost alerts. And this is something that we, to be honest, started doing relatively recently. And I found it to be incredibly valuable. I've worked with our head of product to set a handful of cost alerts. It just allows us to stay on top of cloud spend and avoid the budget overruns that we've kind of set for ourselves. So like, what does that mean in a practical sense? I worked with our head of product to come up with a budget and then set some thresholds. So like say, hey, like we're really trying to spend 100K next month in total cloud spend. It's not just setting it at 100K, it's having alerts from like 40%, 50%, like we basically do it in stages. So if we're at 40% of spend on like day 6 of the month, I'm like, man, but something feels off. Like we're way ahead. And that's like another cue for me. Like obviously there's the usage pattern aspect of it, but if I can just have like a hard number that gets like automatically reported to me, I can go to engineering and be like, hey, it seems like we're way ahead. Is everything okay? Or we're way behind? Is there something missing here? So I think this is just like a very practical way to start your monitoring strategy. But I've just found that allows me to like get ahead of things, not like, hey, last month we went over budget by 200% and like you just have to live with it. So this is just like gives us a little bit more information and lets us be a little bit more proactive. And then it bridges the gap between technical teams and finance. Like, we're not talking about it in the past anymore. It avoids surprises. Or if there is that spike and it's, it is what it is, we can at least start to explain that. So like when we go report to our exec team or report to our board, I don't have to go back and say like, hey, I know it's October 10th, but it seems like there was a spike on September 3rd. And like, you're never going to get great information. Like, what were you doing a month and a half ago? Like, no one likes that question. So this just allows us to kind of like document it, move on, get better at it for next time. And then Joe, do you want to talk about resource allocation?
Yeah, I think, resource allocation is like one of those, maybe no duh items, right, when it comes to an effective strategy. But again, like a lot of things, easier said than done. I'll give you like the top 2 things that you should be monitoring for and removing from your bill of costs. The first being like over provisioned resources. So from an engineering standpoint, right, what's some of the worst things that happens? The application that I built is falling over on weekends, and I have to work, right? I have to figure out why, and I have to fix it. Or it's standing in the way of me working on the things that I need to be working on right now for this upcoming sprint. If you're able to right size resources right out of the gate in early development, that's fantastic, right? But it's also a bit unrealistic in a lot of ways for a lot of organizations. So you can retroactively monitor your environment for resources that have been over provisioned, whether that was came from a very good place. I'm going to make my application or this feature very scalable, very reliable, very sturdy, regardless of the scale, regardless of the utilization. And in doing so, I'm not going to have this thing fall over and cause problems that I have to go and rework, but it comes at a quite literal cost of overspending on resources that aren't needed. That extra headroom is just costing the organization money. So by monitoring for over-provisioned resources, doing something about it based on real-world demand, right? Measured over time to include things like spikes and seasonality so that you're trimming fat, you're not trimming muscle, right, when it comes to cost optimization. The other area that I think is a no-brainer is monitoring for orphaned or unused resources, right? Building apps in Kubernetes, it can get really messy, and there's a lot of resources that are going to get stood up and completely forgotten about. Maybe that happened in early development phases, maybe that happened in smoke tests, maybe that happened somewhere along the way, and they're no longer necessary now that you've launched your application, your product is in prod, but they're still costing an organization money. And so being able to identify those orphaned or unused resources and then do something about them are great ways of reducing cost that really don't hurt, right? And are nothing but goodness for the bottom line of the organization. And then I think there's this happy place that everybody wants to get to, kind of the FinOps utopia, which is being proactive, being preventative, shifting the entire engineering culture to being more cost aware and more proactive about cost efficiency. And this is something that, like Rome, isn't built in a day. It's not built in a week. It's probably not built in a month or even half a year. This is a cultural shift, and it's something that is challenging for almost any engineering organization. But it includes everything from choosing like the most cost-effective tools, the most cost-effective techniques, architectures, services, and more. And I am not the right individual to talk about whether you should be in TypeScript or Go, or whether you should be using a certain flavor of managed Kubernetes over another. To be able to realize a lot of those cost savings, we have a great engineering team, and we've done a lot of webinars in the past that you should look at if you're looking for those kinds of suggestions. But what I'm talking about here is the mentality of a product organization, which includes engineering, which includes product teams. It touches everything from coding practices to reviews to testing to everything else in the CI/CD pipeline, and then the ongoing management of an application. And approaching it with kind of a FinOps mindset where you do feel like it's money out of your own pocket. And those decisions that you make that positively impact your cost efficiency are skills that are highly desirable. They are patterns and practices that can be a little bit viral, and you can be the first in your organization to take this mantle on and drive towards higher cost efficiencies and bring your team along with you, especially if you're in a product role.
So using focus specs to simplify cloud configurations, obviously I'm not on the technical side of the house, but I found this really useful in a couple different ways. So what we're trying to do here is kind of create a playbook for cloud infrastructure and just standardize it. It just seems like, you can do one-off, but you get to a point where you need to kind of get some scale. So I think standardizing it, as you're coming up with a playbook, you're kind of outlining, settings, services, resource configurations, all these things that just align with our organizational goal. And it's just easier to do it in this format. And the benefits are really like, we just want to reduce complexity by narrowing down like the number of cloud services and the configurations that teams need to consider. So we have just like a set of best practices that like we like to see, and the teams driving this are going to be more product and engineering. But I think like as you start to mature, this just helps you get that message across to like a broader team. Like we started with like a small group of folks who are really interested in a FinOps practice. And then like, it's like, okay, well, where do we go from here? Like, how do we make it easy for everyone in the development cycles to use this, or to like have some guidelines? And like, the other thing is it kind of reduces your decision fatigue on some of the stuff. So if you give people some guardrails on like, here, this is what we've agreed to, this is what people, know is going to work, and here is what is best practices, that helps guide folks. And I think that like helps you kind of like grow into it a little bit.
The focus spec isn't just for like third-party vendor software that's in the world of like FinOps or cloud cost management. Like, apply the focus spec to your internal practices. Use that as a common language to communicate between teams. Define common specs. Use it across all of your tooling. Apply unified telemetry and monitoring and alerting, and gather data points across all of your environments, whether that's in the cloud, whether that's on-prem, whether that's in production, whether that's in dev and test. By driving towards that consistency and using this focus spec internally, you're going to get a lot of value out of it. And you're going to have answers to questions that haven't been asked yet, right? Like, you're going to have a report for that when the CFO says, I need to know what the Kubernetes costs are related to this cost center or this product team. Define those standards, work cross-functionally to kind of drive that consistency and implement focus internally. And if you're not familiar with it, there's a lot of great information on the focus spec from the FinOps Foundation. Go and look that stuff up. In terms of compliance and product design, right, this is like one of the moan and groan parts of product management, and frankly, a lot of other functional departments as well. It's an immovable force. It's like a fact of life. It's like death and taxes, but you can make it exponentially less painful by being proactive and building a lot of the governance and the things that make compliance easier into the products to address the pressures that you're receiving from them. So meeting regulatory requirements with less effort, less rework is a good thing. But you need an understanding of relevant laws. You need to understand the standards that are impacting your product. You need to understand what those pressures are to be able to then do something about it proactively. You need to incorporate compliance requirements as early as possible, ideally like all the way in the design phase and not the development phase. And by doing that before you're building code, you're going to have fewer failed releases, fewer things that get dropped out of a CI/CD pipeline because of policy as code or something like that. You should be implementing governance, right? Governance is a good thing. Guardrails, golden paths. Here's how you should do this, and in a repeatable and consistent way is going to prevent like the most often thing, which is just unintended issues that put you out of compliance, but also the potential for things like malicious things that can put you out of compliance, whether that's an external third party or even potentially an internal risk that you're facing. Ideally, these should be modeled around your own internal guidelines when it comes to software development, operational best practices, and compliance requirements and best practices as well. So again, with that kind of sense of being a unique snowflake and realizing that there's no one glove fits all solution, adapt the governance and the compliance approaches around the realities of your organization and your product. Try to make enforcing of those requirements and that compliance to be a real-time thing. Don't add more toil to DevOps teams to have to do this by hand, right? Like, knitting this from whole cloth can be really challenging. Use automated policy enforcement wherever you can. That really helps take a load off of a team, and it helps ensure that it's getting done more consistently. Adopt a regular review and audit cadence, right? Identify things as early as possible, get multiple reviewers. The more eyes, the better in some of these cases. Schedule ongoing compliance check-ins. Put together an internal task force. Bring in third parties if you don't have the resources to do this. There are absolute professionals out there that can help. Put to use tools that can kind of do this continuous monitoring, whether that's by smoke testing inside of your CI/CD pipelines, or using admission controllers, or leveraging policy as code. There's lots and lots of tools today to help make this less of a human effort to accomplish. And then finally, you're probably doing it 70, 80% of your time instead of writing code. So Document everything, get detailed records. It goes a really long way. Champion that transparency and accountability with the teams that you manage and work with. You can move to the next.
All right, so boosting efficiency through monitoring tools, identified 4 points. Real-time insights is pretty straightforward. I think, like if we have real-time live data on cloud usage, it just allows us to spot inefficiencies really early and make adjustments on the fly much faster. And then if we talk about performance metrics, if we've set internally a set of KPIs for efficiency, whether it's like cost per transaction or utilization rates, any of that stuff. Over time, you can start to highlight trends, which I think is really important. And you can look back and say like, okay, this is where optimization really worked and we nailed it, or hey, like that was a mistake. Like we need to like rethink how we do that. So I think it can be like both a positive and a negative when you're tracking some of these KPIs. And the benefit is really just informing the future on like, hey, step on the gas for this, or like we need to pull this back and rethink it. As for identifying optimization opportunities, I think just continuously optimizing cloud usage is pretty much always the goal here. So if we can kind of like start to detect performance bottlenecks or addressing bottlenecks proactively, we can start to understand when we're over provisioning, ruling out those very costly mistakes and just getting more efficient. And then automation, obviously no surprise. I think teams across every org right now are being asked to do a lot more with a lot less. And if you can reduce the manual at the edges, it goes a long way. And so I think everyone is being forced to do that. So this obviously helps. And then scheduling tasks for off-peak hours, especially like if we have like huge data processing that's like going to be really time intensive, like how can we move that to off-peak? Pretty straightforward things like that. So leveraging tools is obviously huge. I love a cost dashboard. We have a couple of them that we use regularly. Yesterday, I was going back and forth with our director of engineering actually on the dashboard. I don't want to brag, but mine was right and his was wrong. That's probably never happened. Engineering is almost always right, but it was actually like a really valuable exercise. It was like, hey, I think you're off by like 30% on this. Like I can't back into it. I'm looking at our AWS bill, I'm looking at our GCP bill, and I think I'm pretty close, but how can we make this golf work? And it was all just comparing, hey, this is what I'm rolling up in my dashboard versus. So the cost dashboard is just like a form of language, shared language for me and getting everyone on board. And then automated reporting. I think you can do a lot more with this though. If your finance team talks in Excel, then like shoot them a report in Excel. It's in their inbox. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to explain the technical side of things. And you can start to like, close that gap again. It helps you kind of like, you stop wondering about costs and you just have something like that you can actually use, which I think is really valuable.
Especially in Kubernetes, in modern software development and operations, it's super dynamic. Everything is very scalable, both vertically, horizontally, but that also means that there's a higher likelihood for anomalies to take place and for those anomalies to have real meaningful cost impacts as well. So one of the things that's difficult to do without tooling is anomaly detection, especially in real time. So use tools that surface anomalies that are otherwise going to cost your organization a lot of money as early as possible, and then get ahead of them to make changes, right size resource, get rid of unused or orphaned resources, do the things early instead of getting questions from someone like Mike at the end of the month when he gets the AWS bill saying, what were you guys? Nobody wants those surprises. The other thing is integrating tooling with your own workflows, right? Embedding cost data into the daily tools that you're using, the daily reports that you're getting, enhancing all of your decision making with data-driven insights. So I think those things are great uses for the tooling.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about cost governance and training. So I will start at the bottom, but I think cost governance is really important here. Obviously, it's not the most exciting thing, but just setting some guardrails, like, if you have some spend limits, maybe an approval process if you think you're going to go way over. All that stuff is valuable and it just kind of like covers you. And then just having well-defined policies for resource provisioning is also important. But if you can start to build a little bit of discipline, I think it helps. And then when you have the stuff where it's like, look, everything was on fire, we had to do this, it's like an exception. You can never do this because I understand like customer issues come up or, so there's something that happens that's like outside of your control. But I think like at least starting to build those guardrails is really important. And then what you really want to do is just like strike a balance between giving teams freedom to innovate and maintaining some accountability. Like, yeah, you have to at some point reel it in. And it makes the exceptions, it allows some space for the exceptions, but you can have some discipline there. And I think regular awareness and training is important. Like if you can use some of your FinOps resources or time just to do some like light education, whether it's like engineering, product, finance, just on best practices, just so everyone understands the financial impact of cloud usage. I've always found that engineering is really up for the challenge of understanding how much they're spending. Like if you can just really give them some information on it, everyone loves to optimize what they're working on, and I don't think that cloud costs isn't included in that. I think that's just another added variable to like make a really elegant solution for something you're working on.
And I feel like I've been beating the automation drum this whole webinar, but I'm going to do it like one more time. Use auto scaling groups, right? Like it's not the end all be all solution. It is not going to get you to perfect from a resource allocation versus utilization standpoint, but it's a really great start. Match resources to the demand in real time. It lets you get away from kind of babysitting, hand scaling your environments, and then optimize code and architecture, the plumbing underneath everything and the workloads themselves for performance, whether that's refactoring something that you've already built to be more efficient or adopting new technologies and new approaches to the next project and kind of baking as much of that in as possible. I think community in FinOps is incredibly powerful, the same way that community in product management is very powerful. I find that both of them have vibrant communities that are ready to give you their best practices, their advice, help you out of a pickle that you find yourself in because they were in that same kind of challenging situation in the past. So it could feel like an uphill battle, both working in product and working in finance, working on FinOps teams. But adopting and practicing FinOps can really ultimately be good for the business while potentially creating a little bit of friction within an organization. So don't go it alone. There's lots of others that can kind of help you out. Share your knowledge, share your experiences, get plugged into others that can help. Give tips and guidance where you can, and then get those tips and guidance where you need them as well. Stay on top of this very dynamic, fast-moving place. FinOps, the final book has not been written on FinOps. This is an evolving and changing thing, and staying on top of it is going to help. Collaborate wherever possible to solve problems. That means both internally within your organization, but also externally with other teams that are going through the same kind of things that you are. Get outside of your bubble, right? PMs and FinOps people are going to find new, interesting, and applicable lessons outside of just their industry, outside of just their competitive market space. Look to completely other industries sometimes for what's worked with them. If it doesn't give you something actionable, it might spark an idea. And then go learn, right? There's lots of great and in many cases free learning opportunities afforded by the FinOps community to get better at this stuff and accelerate the speed at which you're understanding it and then implementing it within your own organization. And we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, and just to riff off that brief, I think the biggest needle movers for me have been the FinOps Foundation Slack group is huge. Like just being able to search things in there and then talk to other folks who have similar problems or similar issues that they're working on has been great. FinOps X, like attending conferences and webinars, there was definitely a feeling of like, hey, other people like understand the problem I'm working on, So I think that was great. It really sped up a lot of the learning and practical things that we could do. And I think just getting involved in these communities have been really valuable and have had a huge payoff for me.
It's been great talking about about the challenges that are at the intersection of finance and product and how FinOps actually has some solutions for both. I had a good time and I appreciate it. And I hope everybody else in the audience, whether you're watching now or whether you're watching in the future, I hope you're taking some good things away from this. We do have a couple of questions that I'm going to pose really quickly. So are there any development guidelines that can help with cost optimization? Not from Mike and I, right? I think I would encourage you to take a look at our monthly KubeCost webinars that we've been putting on for quite a while now. There are a number of discussions between engineering leaders and developers and product folks that go pretty deep into recommendations for how to, do development in a more cost-effective manner. We have some great Kubernetes guides on our website at kubecost.com that you can take a look at as well. So we've got a lot of resources at our website. We've got blog posts that go pretty deep on this topic as well. Please take a look at those. Second question we've got is, are alerts in KubeCost static? What analytics does KubeCost use? Does it do right sizing automatically? Maybe I'll take those in reverse. We do have a feature that we launched in 2.0 and have refined in more recent launches called KubeCost Actions, and it does allow for automating right sizing capabilities. You need to install an admission controller and an agent, but that's commonplace with any of the solutions that are looking at doing automated right scaling for saving costs at your organization, kind of in a hands-free motion without having to lift a finger. We use, more analytics than probably we've got time to kind of talk through, but we have a really great documentation site at docs.kubecost.com. I'd encourage you to take a look at the plethora of analytics that KubeCost is collecting from Kubernetes environments, regardless of where those Kubernetes environments live. And no, the alerts are based off of real-time data that then gets reconciled with the actual billing data. That data can arrive, in some cases between 4 and 48 hours after the fact, and then it gets reconciled. But no, you can trigger alerts from real-time data and understand kind of what the impact is going to be on cost from making changes there. Third question, does KubeCost suggest corrective actions in a reactive fashion, or does it proactively use like smart analytics? And the answer is yes to both, actually. So we do provide a long tail of data that you can run reports. As an example, I think there's a great story. I remember going to my engineering development team and asking if we could do some right sizing. And I brought with me, in a very proud way, about 30 days worth of data. And the developers looked at me like I was crazy because I was trying to get them to make significant performance impacting changes based on just like 30 days worth of data. And that's not enough in many cases. So, bring to bear long histories of data to help engineers more confidently make right sizing decisions. That's a great one. KubeCost does that, but also use KubeCost to predict and forecast the impact of changes that happen over time before you even attempt to make them. I think that's another great proactive use of the tool. And those are all the questions I see right now in this panel. Did we any others that we wanted to touch on?
No, I think that's good for now. We didn't really get too many pre-submitted questions, so we'll just go ahead and stop there. So thank you so much both to Joe and Mike today for walking us through this, and thank you all for attending.